I built the system that texted me when a car blew a red light at Colfax in York. The night it texted me my wife's plates outside a boutique hotel in Lodo while she was supposedly in Boulder on a yoga retreat, I felt my stomach drop through 2 floors. In my world, data is a tool. In that second, it was a weapon I wasn't supposed to touch. I'm Miles, 38, traffic signal timing engineer for Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. If you've ever watched a green wave unfurl on Spear and made all the lights without breaking, I might have tuned it. My job is flow. I babysit centrals and controllers, I talk about split phases at parties until people wander off, I thread buses and bikes into a city that's growing faster than budgets. I married someone who loves the idea of flow too. Harper is 36, all oxygen and soft light, runs a wellness studio in Reno that smells like eucalyptus and ambition. She used to be a physical therapist. She pivoted into breathwork and sculpt classes and playlists that make the room exhale in unison. On our first date, she teased me for timing crosswalks in my head. I teased her for syncing her inhale to the bartender's pour. We laughed because we both knew we were the kind of people who want to make a city behave. The text from the ALPR system should have gone to a supervisor. It did him first. It also went to me because I was on overnight maintenance and I keep a shadow alert on my phone to catch false positives. I saw the plate, the timestamp, the geohash. I saw the still frame, Harper's blue Subaru nosed up to the hotel awning, a man's hand bracing the passenger door, a sliver of her profile in the window like a postcard priced above my pay grade. She had texted me an hour before from a retreat center in Boulder with a photo of a circle of yoga mats and a quote about opening. I hadn't snooped to find the contradiction. The contradiction drove into my jurisdiction like it wanted me to write it up. I put my phone face down on the console in the traffic management center and listened to the room hum. Cameras flickered across a wall of screens, rain-slicked Broadway, the taillights streaming onto I-25 like rubies poured on velvet. Jules, my friend from college who runs field teams with a radio clipped to her soul, glanced over. She knows my face like a signal map. "That your car?" she asked quietly. She didn't look at the screen. She knows not to. I told myself the system was noisy. Plates get misread. Blue Subarus are the city's unofficial fleet. I swallowed hard enough to feel the back of my tongue pulse and opened a new window to investigate a failing detector on Federal. I told myself I would not look again. I lasted 20 minutes. When I clicked back, the Subaru had left the curb. Our ALPR tagged it again 2 blocks south on Wazi, then again near the Market Street garage. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with an alert from our home thermostat. Eco mode off, it said. Front door unlocked by guest key. I created that key so my sister could pick up our daughter after school when Harper hosted late classes. I hadn't told anyone else about it. The lock log didn't lie. I waited until my break to step into the hallway and call Harper. The call went to voicemail. I stood at the window that looks over Colfax and watched the snowplow idle with its hazard lights blinking patient as a heartbeat. The cold got under the pane and into my teeth. I called again and she answered on the third ring sounding bright like speakers on a porch. "We had a sound bath tonight," she said. "Phone's in the basket. I'm wiped. Are you okay?" "Your plate's pinged downtown," I said. "You texted me from Boulder." She breathed in and out like she was deciding whether to count. "The hotel bar has a circle room that looks like a retreat photo," she said. "My client booked a surprise thing. It ran late. Please don't spy on me with your work." It was the please that undid me. In my life, please is a button you press to cross. When I got off at 6, the sky was icing sugar. I drove home feeling like the lights were all one shade too bright. The Subaru sat in our driveway, tidy in its slot. Inside, the house had a smell that wasn't ours. Clean, expensive, citrus and wood. Harper had left a note on the counter that said "sleeps like a log" with 2 coffee mugs sketched next to it. Our daughter Maya, 7, had turned the living room into a fort with blankets and a colony of stuffed boxes. She was snoring with her mouth open under a throw pillow. I touched the corner of the pillow and told myself things were true because they were in front of me. I'm not proud of the next hour. I opened the ChargePoint app because we split cars and I sometimes check sessions when we play grid games with our electric bill. It showed a session at 21:30 a.m. at a private garage 3 blocks from the hotel, RFID used, belonged to a guest credential, purchased last month by someone with admin privileges. 38 minutes plugged into a station enforcement can't access. I opened our insurance telematics because I convinced us to get the discount. It showed a hard brake at 2005-2 near the Cherry Creek Trail and an acceleration event 10 minutes later on Spear that made my skin itch. I opened the Smart Lock app, 2 entries, guest key in and out. Our door camera was pointed a fraction sideways because I'd been lazy last week and didn't tighten the bracket. The world had conspired to leave me with almost enough information to go insane. I didn't confront her that morning. I packed Maya's lunch and tied her shoes and walked her to the corner in a hat that made me look less like a detective. Harper slept late and texted me mid-morning a photo of the studio with sunstripes on the floor, the caption "Inhale, exhale, rebuild." If you work in systems, you know the moment when a sensor fails because it stops making weirdness. Calm is suspect after chaos. Escalation doesn't introduce itself. It walks in with a clipboard and asks for a signature. A week later, a letter from our bank arrived with the kind of paper that makes your hand feel dishonest. The studio's line of credit had a new bridge tied to equipment upgrades. The vendor was listed as North Loft PR. The purpose line said crisis messaging. The amount was just large enough to hum. The auto pay had been switched to our joint account. I took the letter to Harper like it was a fragile insect. She took it with both hands. She said her new prenatal class had run into a social media storm. Someone posted a screenshot that made it look like they were making medical claims. Northlock had helped. She would pay the loan back within the quarter. She used the word narrative like a yoga block. All the while, my job pulled at me like tide. A scooter pilot on 17th needed a timing change. A coach line complained we were hobbling their mornings. My supervisor floated new metrics. I wrote a memo about protected lefts and ate it because budgets are poems. The city kept moving and I kept my hands in black boxes and my head in rectangles. At night, Harper kissed me with a shape that felt practiced. Maya asked if we could have a camp out in the living room. I used my back as an excuse to say later. Rumors move through a neighborhood like weather off the foothills. Our next-door neighbor, Janet, who knows everyone's trash schedule and all their secrets, mentioned in the kind of whisper that has a stage light on it that she'd seen Harper downtown on a Wednesday looking elevated. I laughed too loud. Janet touched my forearm the way people do when they think they've bumped a bruise. I decided to wait for something that wasn't a screen. It arrived wearing a blazer that cost more than my suit. Owen came to a city stakeholder meeting about a redevelopment on Brighton. His company runs a portfolio of mid-rise buildings with names that sound like handcrafted soap. He shook hands like he owned most of the wrists. I didn't know he knew Harper until he introduced himself after my presentation with an expression that reads, as respect if you don't know, that respect can also be a map. He complimented my approach to signal priority words that make my heart leave home, then mentioned casually that he loves Harper's work, that her studio saved his back, that he was hosting a private breathwork thing for investors next month, and did our department accept donations for pilot projects because he'd love to help us modernize our ALPR backend. It took me a beat to hear the undertone. Then I heard it too loud. He knew what I worked on. He knew my wife's schedule. He wanted to be in the room where budgets happen. I said, with a voice I practiced for public comment, that donations go through a formal channel, that my office sets policy, not sponsorships. He smiled like we were in on a joke. His assistant pressed a card into my hand with his cell and a line that said Cobalt Partners, which I didn't ask about yet. That night, Harper told me she'd been invited to a private dinner at a new rooftop bar that hadn't opened. She said local owners wanted to empower community wellness leaders. The name Cobalt crossed my mind like a dark bird. I asked who was going. She said she had to leave at 7. My phone pinged at 8 with a notification from our door cam. The bracket I tightened was a degree off square, but it saw enough. Harper in a dress I hadn't seen. A man's hand in the frame at her spine. The camera caught 2 seconds of his profile when he leaned down to say something into her hair. You learn shapes the way you learn algebra. Owen, you carry a set of lines in your head and then you see them in the wild and the sum is not a surprise. I did not shout. I did not throw the phone. I took a shower so hot it rewrote my appetite and lay on the bath mat until the house asked me to get up. At 10, the thermostat went to eco. At 10:20, the guest key unlocked and relocked. At 10:30, one of our motion sensors that I had installed to pretend I could control a life I couldn't pinged and then went quiet. The choice showed up 2 nights later at 2 in the morning when the neighbor across the alley called 911 and me in the same breath. I got to the house 6 minutes after the patrol car. Our front door had been kicked in, the jam splintered clean like a textbook. Drawers dumped, TV gone, jewelry box empty. Harper stood on the lawn in a robe she doesn't wear, shaking. Maya slept at my sister's that night because of a sleepover we owed her for a month. The only thing not moving was the point where Harper's eyes wouldn't look. The officer took the report with a tone that says he's on hour 13. He asked about cameras. I said we had one and he said the angle was bad and I said yes. He asked about serial numbers. I said I had an old spreadsheet because of a fire drill at work that made me label things. He nodded like a man who wished everyone were me for 10 minutes. He said there had been a string of break-ins, that thieves know when people have installed fancy gyms and televisions for winter, that we'd be lucky to see anything back by June. The adjuster came the next day with a suit that looked like a number. She asked whether we had updated our inventory recently. She asked whether any of the items had been purchased together. She asked whether we'd had any PR incidents at the studio. It sounded unrelated until it didn't. She said insurance companies read the internet too. She said it gently, like a nurse. The evidence came from a direction I hadn't expected. Our thermostat's activity log showed the heat off at 150, then up to 72 at 2. Our garage motion sensor registered movement at 148, then again at 208. Our car telematics pinged the Subaru's tailgate at 217. The door cam, angled wrong, caught nothing but a sliver of a sleeve. And then the thing that made my mouth taste metallic, the lock log said guest key at 159. Not a kick, a code. I sat at the table with all of it spread like homework. I didn't know whether to throw up or call a priest. I called Jules. Don't tell me what you saw on the city system, she said before I started. Tell me what you saw in your house. I told her everything that wasn't an ALPR hit. She listened with the quiet of someone holding a cup of gasoline and a match. When I was finished, she said, "You're going to want to use the system you built to write a clean story. Don't. The second you query with a personal motive, they can take your badge even if you find God. If this is a burglary staged to cover a problem, the evidence you need lives in your house and your bank and your insurance portal. You can be a spouse and a dad and a homeowner. Don't also be a cop." I hated how right she was. Harper came home from the studio and froze when she saw the table. She put a hand on the back of a chair and the skin went white under her knuckles. She looked the way people look at crash scenes. "This isn't what you think," she said, which is a sentence that lives on every fourth rung of hell. "It's exactly what I think," I said quietly. "You had a key. The thermostat knows your habits better than I do. If someone you know did this to file a claim, stop it. Tell me and we stop it." She sat down and pressed her palms flat. Her eyes were wet in a way I don't know if anyone else ever sees. She whispered, "I'm in trouble," like it wasn't for me to fix. Then she shook her head, reset her face, and said, "I won't let you weaponize your job against me." I didn't sleep. At 6 a.m., I stood in line outside the insurer's local office and asked to add a statement to our claim. I gave the adjuster copies of the thermostat log and the lock activity. I gave her the door cam timestamps and the telematics. I did not include the ALPR hits that told me whose car had cruised past our house twice at 147 at 2 miles under the limit. I wrote, in a voice you use on forms, that an authorized code accessed the house before the break. 2 days later, Internal Affairs called me into a room with glass walls and asked me about an unauthorized ALPR alert I'd received 2 weeks prior. They showed me a printout of my shadow subscription to false positives. They showed me the 3 times I'd clicked into plate data after midnight. They didn't accuse. They asked me to explain my work. The director looked like he wanted to like me. He also looked like he liked rules more. I told them that a personal conflict had overlapped with an alert. I told them I had removed my shadow subscription. I told them I had not used any exported plate data for anything outside my job. They put me on paid administrative leave while they reviewed procedures. It's not a scarlet letter, it feels like one. On day 3 of leave, a man in a suit I recognized knocked on my door. He wasn't a cop, he was a city auditor. Someone had tipped his office to a cluster of PR payments from small businesses funneled through a development group in exchange for narrative management when those businesses brushed scandal. One of the businesses had a studio in Reno. One of the names on the checks was Harper's. One of the donors on the development side was Cobalt Partners. The auditor asked if I would talk to him about conflict of interest because my wife and a developer had both made payments near times when someone had suggested civic upgrades in exchange for donations. He asked if I knew any of this. I said I knew my wife was scared. Days blur when you're waiting for a machine to decide whether you are allowed to be yourself. I picked Maya up from school every afternoon and pretended the world made sense between the parking lot and the kitchen table. She braided my hair with brutal little fingers during a movie and told me I looked like a Viking. I told her she had jelly on her shirt and that Vikings didn't mind jelly. She asked if mommy was in trouble and I said mommy made a mess and is trying to clean it. She asked if the bad guys would come back. I said bad guys get bored of houses that are full of paperwork. Harper texted me an address to meet her for coffee. A place in 5 Points with a back room where people write novels that take them 5 years and never need an ending. She said, "I'm sorry," and for the first time I believed the part of her that knows sorry isn't a tool. She said Owen offered to make the break-in go away, to replace what we lost off books if I'd stopped feeding the insurer. She said, "Leon, you didn't know about him," she said, and I said I guessed. Had tried to help shape threads where moms were whispering about the studio's new prenatal class. She said Northloft had told her to identify a controlling spouse early in the crisis messaging to preempt a narrative that she was reckless. She said she had told them her husband worked for the city and they had smiled like a knife and explained how to frame me without naming me. She said she went along because fear makes hierarchy out of air. Then she said she went to the insurer and withdrew the claim. She said she told him she would cover the door and the TV and wait on the rest. She said she didn't want to talk about who had been in our house. She said she had blocked Owen's number. She said she had told Leon to stop doing favors in forums he doesn't belong in. She said she had canceled the next dinner at the rooftop bar. She said she could not fix the machine she had fed, but she was willing to starve it. I believed half of it because believing is a practice. I told her I was on leave pending a review and she looked at me like I'd been shot. I told her I might lose the only job that makes me feel like a useful animal and she said, "I'll go to your director, I'll tell them it was my stupidity." And I said, "Please don't make me a public mural," and she put her hand over her mouth and nodded. The audit investigation moved like a glacier under warm rain. The city is nothing if not processes nested inside processes writing memos about processes. The auditor came back with more precise questions and a promise of confidentiality that would protect our daughter from weaponized whispers. He showed me copies of emails that read like expensive versions of panic text. Developers promising support for strategic communication in exchange for priority at the Joint Task Force meeting. Small business owners offering community narrative partnerships if a certain complaint went away. He asked me if I would be willing to be a witness with a narrow lens, what I saw in the world of data governance and what our conflict of interest policy says. I told him yes, with a voice that doesn't show. Internal Affairs cleared me 2 weeks later with a write-up that reads like a cautionary tale. They asked me to remove personal alerts from my device and to sign a refresher on data boundaries I had co-written 6 months earlier. They reminded me that even angels look like violators on paper. They said the system had flagged a pattern of developer requests that made my case look small. They said they were not finished reading that pattern. The developer's name appeared in the paper 3 months after the first alert. The article used words like alleged and probe and influence. It mentioned donations, it mentioned PR firms, it mentioned the city's ethics board. It did not mention my wife, it did not mention me. It mentioned a portfolio of buildings with names like Crafted Soap. It mentioned a partner who had quietly backed out of several deals. It mentioned a rooftop bar that had shifted owners. It mentioned a nonprofit that returned a check. Our house is boring now in a way I want annuities to be. We replaced the door. We left the splintered jamb in the garage as a reminder that wood can look strong and still give under a boot. Harper and I did not fix. We're not broken in a way that glues. We are. True. That truth is a polite schedule, a custody calendar that looks like a Tetris board, a pair of people who can say to each other in a hallway exchange, "Thank you for bringing her cleats and I'm sorry I made a ruin of our story, and you didn't do it alone." Maya plays soccer with a ferocity that makes me choke up and then laugh at myself for choking up about 7-year-olds elbowing like professionals. She also collects traffic signal stickers and puts them on her water bottle and says, "This one is Daddy's light." Sometimes at 2 in the morning, I wake to the city breathing. Sirens far off, a truck engine holding a note up the hill, the heater kick. I go to the kitchen and drink water and stare at the dark rectangle where a TV used to be and think about all the ways people reroute themselves to avoid a closed road. I think about Harper at the studio with a room full of women who want to love their bodies without asking the internet permission. I think about Owen walking into a quiet room where his name echoes and no one shakes his hand. I think about the way Leon closed his case and looked at the hallway wall for a full minute like it had written a new scale he needed to learn. I think about the line I wrote on the whiteboard at work in a training: power plus privacy equals discipline. I circle it again. It isn't elegant, it's enough. There's a joke among engineers that our job is to keep things moving until someone bigger than us says stop. The thing I didn't know is that in a marriage, in a city, there are 1,000 tiny stops every day that ask for a hand on a shoulder instead of a stop bar. I mistook my tools for those hands. I kept timing my home like a corridor where I could smooth everyone else's red lights out. It turns out you can't green wave your way through betrayal. You can only stand in the crosswalk and decide whether you want to stay human when the cars are impatient. We rebuilt our air. It looks like co-parenting without knives. It looks like I bring extra orange slices to games because Harper forgets, and she brings a bakery cookie after practice with frosting that stains a kid's mouth blue. It looks like Maya snoring softly in a fort and me not moving the pillow because what kills you in one season comforts you in the next. It looks like a thermostat at 68 because we can, and a door camera pointed straight because now I check the set screw twice. It looks like a city where a man like me keeps his badge because he knew where to stop, and a developer like Owen loses his handshakes because he didn't. What would you do if the data you built to protect people showed you your own life out of bounds? Would you look away to keep your job and your house intact? Or take the hit and tell the truth even when the system might spit you out? If this story hit something in you, I'd be grateful if you like or subscribe so I can keep writing the messy, human ones.